Let's do it. 2 in 2 weeks. 2 in 1 week. Really? What is this? November of last year? Hi everybody, I know what you're thinking. You want to purchase ARCs. You may have in fact purchased ARCs. And then you've clicked on this idiot face telling you not to do the thing that you want to do, and now all you want to do is punch your computer. Well, I get it, but I will attempt to get you to refrain from that first one specifically, because nobody can afford another monitor these days, especially after you spent all your money on an all-in of ARCs. And 2, we are going to cover the 5 reasons you shouldn't back ARCs, which is on Kickstarter right now by Leader Games. And I didn't even introduce myself. If you're new to the channel, this is Room and Board. My name is Chris George, and this is a series that I do to counteract the FOMO, to contrast the hype, to attack people who just want to have fun with their toys and not be bothered to think about being responsible with their money. I get it. I am like you. Mostly, I do these videos to talk myself out of making irresponsible fiscal decisions, and future Chris, I'd like to tell you, you might even get a pass on this one. You won't. You won't. But this is a series that I do for campaigns that have raised over $1 million on Kickstarter or GameFound or even Indiegogo. I'm checking Indiegogo every day just to see if I can find one. There aren't too many to be found yet. And so ARCs crossed that threshold last night. Therefore, I am beholden to the YouTube gods to put out a video. And this is a video that's not necessarily designed to make you not back the game, even though the title suggests it. This is a video to make sure that you are equally as excited when the game arrives at your door as you are now when you hit back. I find personally, it's very easy to get swept up in the Kickstarter buying spree and to see something and just hit click and get swept up in that sort of excitement without necessarily taking the time to do the due diligence to see if this game's actually going to be right for you. Because it might be, and it might be an amazing back, but it also might just end up sitting on a shelf and then, well, you sell it a year down the road after playing it once. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants that weight looming over them. We want to be playing games. So before I go into the 5 reasons you shouldn't back, let's talk about what is exciting about this game. Because I always like to start out this way, and there is a lot to be legitimately excited about. This is by Leader Games and the designer of Root and Oath, and the same art director as well, as I'm sure you could see with the art style. And Leader Games have been incredibly successful. Their last 3 campaigns raised over $1 million. The Root Marauders expansion raised over $2 million at the final tally. And there's a reason. People love these games. People really enjoy this design team. And right off the bat, I feel if you are going to be supporting a company, because there are many out there, I really like the approach that Leader Games takes to crowdfunding. Some board game companies and publishers are more concerned about marketing to you rather than actually showcasing and displaying their game, and I don't believe this is the case for Leader Games, and it is so refreshing to see. I love that they are making it as accessible as possible for you to determine if this game is right for you. They have a free print and play, which most companies would be afraid of releasing. They have free digital versions on Tabletop Simulator or Tabletop Playground, which I'd never heard of until this campaign. And I think this is so refreshing. And there really should be no reason for you not to have a good sense of how this game plays by the materials that they're putting forth. And I love that. And what they're putting forth, the highlights that they're putting forth, are also highlights for me. It seems like a game that is going to be fairly easy to pick up and play and to teach to people, which is great. And I like the little decisions that the card play provides, which we will talk about in a later section. I personally know people who will love the battle system, because whenever you're going to fight a battle, depending on the number of ships that you have in play and the number of units you have in play, you get to choose a number of dice. But the dice, or the type of dice, aren't necessarily dependent on the unit type. It's just the number of them, and you can choose from 3 different dice, one being a sort of safer attack, but it's got a higher chance to miss, one being a middle ground, and then one being an incredibly aggressive attack, which can come off really well, or it can really damage you in the process. And I think that's really fun. I know my friend Zach will always choose the most risky dice, and I know that it will be incredibly enjoyable to watch that blow up in his face over and over and over again. And I also really like how you get points in this game, or how the round objectives are structured. Every round, there'll be 2 objectives that you can compete for, and then they'll shift to the side and a new one will emerge. And you get to see which objective is going to emerge later on, so you can think ahead and plan to try to have the most of a certain thing at the end of that specific round. So you're not necessarily competing for a general domination of the galaxy, but you're competing to slowly crawl your way up and complete these objectives and expand your reach in a different way while paying mind to a lot of other little components, which feels pretty fun. I like that there's this little initiative track where you're committing resources to as well. And everything that you do is dependent on your actions and whatever actions you choose. And so it's more about deciding where do I allot these actions and in what capacity, rather than charging headlong towards a goal. There is that end objective card, for sure. So you have also an end goal to strive towards, but these little goals that you keep on picking away at over the course of the game, I think that's pretty fun. And the pitch just speaks to me. I think it's really neat that they have taken such care. If you read through their FAQ, one of the FAQs about, are the meeples going to be screen printed? They say no, because the orientation of your meeple matters, and because it reflects, a healthy ship or a damaged ship or whatever. And so having screen printed would just kind of clutter up the table and make it not as specific. And I don't know, this is a campaign and a game that currently feels really thought out and is appealing, definitely. Now here's your bonus reason number 6. You shouldn't back, but it's actually a positive for me, so I'm going to talk about it in the things that I'm excited about, is that it only plays to 3 to 4 players, and that may not work for you. You may prefer games at 2 players, you may prefer games with a wider range, and I think that's a reasonable thing to turn you off of this particular game, but I'm kind of happy that this game has a limited range. I find with board games nowadays, they're so obsessed with providing the appearance of inclusivity, and saying, well, no, don't worry, you can play this with up to 8 players if you buy 2 copies, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's ever going to be good with 8 players. So I really appreciate with this game that it is only 3 to 4 players, that they're not trying to throw in a solo mode. They're specific that this won't work with a solo experience. This won't work with 2 people. You need that 3 to 4 player count. And I don't know about you, but there are games in my collection where I will only play with a certain player count, and I kind of like that this one has reduced that range for me to determine that it's not as great with 5 and just offer it for 3 to 4. I think this is actually a very interesting and generous decision, honestly, because I have no doubt they could manufacture a way for 5 people to play the game. And it wouldn't be as good, but you could throw it in there and then just hope that people would play it for 3 to 4. But I'm happy that it's not for 5 players. They've knocked off those extra components, and that's why you can get it for the relatively affordable $60 price point, or relatively affordable for most of these large Kickstarters, which often have a price point of $100 or more. I think that's pretty cool. So even that little thing gets me hyped. I'm very generous towards Leader Games, but just because I admire what they're doing doesn't mean I'm not going to spray cold water all over you like some former president's definitely not existing sex tape. I've been nice enough. I've hit my Canadian quota. Now I can finally unleash my own inner demons and put them on somebody else for, the next 15 minutes, and maybe I'll finally feel good about myself after that. So let's get into the 5 reasons you shouldn't back ARCs, because there are legitimate reasons, and depending where you are and where you live, I really think this is a bad deal for you. Even though I just said it was a reasonable deal, it might also be a bad deal. We'll get to it. But first, reason number 5, you shouldn't back ARCs, is if you are charmed by the art. And I know that sounds strange. Loving the art should be a positive. And it is. Having something beautiful on your table is fantastic. It's what we all aspire to. It's why those large Kickstarters do incredibly well when they offer the miniature side of things. Because people want to bling out their stuff. People want a beautiful looking game. It's easier to get a game off the shelf. It's easier to get somebody interested when the art style is charming. I'm not saying the art style isn't charming, but I know for me, when I first looked at this game, I thought of Root, I thought of Oath, and I thought, wow, this is another game by that team. I know that those games are good. I guess I should just back this one. And I think that's somewhat legitimate. You see that name recognition and brand recognition and you say, oh yeah, That's more of what I like. But it's not necessarily more of what you like. There are distinct differences between the three games. I haven't played Oath, but I have played Root. While this shares some common DNA, there's also some very noticeable differences that may not gel with you. And if you are backing solely on this art and this art style and this sense of nostalgia, rather than actually taking the time to think about if the mechanics or components will gel with you, then that's obviously a reason to rethink backing. And it's really interesting because I've read through the rulebook and I've looked at this campaign a bunch and tried to do as much research as I can so I can prepare this video for you all. And I still couldn't really tell you what this game is about. That's not because I haven't been reading the rules. It's more that I have been overjoyed or enticed, or more enticed by the mechanics themselves and the art itself, that I haven't really thought about the overarching nature of the game. I think, oh, this mechanic looks cool, and that mechanic is cool, and oh, that seems interesting as well. And I'm assuming that they'll all mesh well together, but I couldn't tell you what the theme is. I mean, I could. I know it's the crumbling of nations in space and you having to go out and seek additional influence and expand your reach across the galaxy so that you don't die or fade away into space dust or get ground up into Space Jam. I know this is the theme, but it is the last thing on my mind. So really ask yourself, do you know the full picture of this game, or are you just saying, yep, art, I'm in, I'll figure it out later. And that might be okay, and that might work out for you. But I can speak from personal experience that when I've done that, just because I really like the art design and the designer doesn't necessarily mean I'll like everything by that same team. Now, reason number 4 you shouldn't back, I almost said Oath, ARCs, is that you're not gonna play the campaign. Now there's a sense when we get to Kickstarter that we must back at the highest tier of every Kickstarter campaign, regardless of what is offered, because you don't want to miss out on something. You don't want to miss that expansion that makes the game playable. You don't want to miss that extra special thing that'll be so expensive to get at the retail market or in the secondhand market, which definitely happens, and I can appreciate that a lot. But I also think that this is one of those games where the base pledge feels great. For $60 US or $77 Canadian, you can get what looks like a really solid game. And so the obvious upsell here is, well, if that game looks good, for just $40 more, I might as well go up to that second level. I mean, I'm paying for the shipping anyway, as it is, as my peanut gallery of a girlfriend likes to remind me every time I try to film these videos.
Too much shipping. The cost of shipping. Oh, sorry, buddy. You did it for the content.
You gotta do it for the content. But the thing about campaigns and campaigns in games with one-shot modules is that it makes them a lot more difficult to get to the table for a lot of people. I mean, for a lot of you, I know you haven't finished playing or even started your copy of Oath yet. And yet I know there's also this need where it just makes sense. It just makes sense to grab that extra add-on. I mean, I get that mentality, but there's also the other side of things where it's only $10 off of the MSRP. That's the difference in savings that you're actually going to make from getting the campaign now or getting the base game, seeing if you enjoy it, seeing if you enjoy it enough to want to devote 8 game sessions to it in relatively close frequency so that you all remember what is happening in the campaign, versus getting the campaign box, diving into the base game and realizing that it's likely enough. So that's reason number 4. Perhaps not a reason to not back the game entirely, but really analyze what level of pledge you actually need and will realistically get to the table. That's the question I bring forward to you with number 4. Moving on to reason number 3 you shouldn't back ARCs is if you are most drawn in by the trick-taking aspect. And this is really billing itself as a trick-taking game. And so you might have been brought in to this world with that assumption. You think trick-taking with a board. Very similar to games that are like deck building with a board. the board enhances the trick-taking aspect, but the trick-taking is still the core mechanic and the core focus, and that is absolutely not the case with this game. I see the resemblance to trick-taking, and I understand why they are marketing it as such, but I honestly think it is the wrong way to describe the game. So this is where we're talking about the cards, which I mentioned before, which honestly is one of my favorite aspects of the game, but it feels a lot more like a take on Puerto Rico or similar games with following the leader actions than necessarily trick-taking. So if you're unfamiliar, each card will have a suit, and that suit will basically determine the types of actions that you can take. And so the leader will play a suit, and everyone, in order to get the most value out of their actions, should follow that suit and play a card that's higher than that suit. Because if you play a card that is the same suit and higher than that suit, you get to do all the actions on your card, or more of them, than if you play a card that's a different suit, or if you play a card face down and just replicate the card that the leader first played. And this is really interesting to me. It's interesting that you're going to have to juggle the value of your cards and the amount of physical actions on those cards, because they may not be the same as the value. The 5 won't have 5 actions on them. It'll probably have 2 or 1, whereas the 0 or the 1 will have more actions on it because it's harder to play and it's harder to play effectively. And then there's also the convention of whoever plays the highest card in the leading suit gets to retain the initiative and play another suit and start the leading again. And so I understand the comparison to trick-taking, and I do think it's cool that there are 24 cards out there, only one of each in 4 suits from 0 to 5. But in each round, not all of the cards are dealt. You're not going to ever have that satisfaction that I personally seek and enjoy from trick-taking games in terms of knowing what is out there and having that complete information that something like Bridge gives you, of counting all the cards in a suit and knowing that they're all gone. Because not every card is going to show up. Some cards will be played face down and you'll never know what cards were played. And I think there's enough differences in that one mechanic and the fact that the board where all the action takes place is a huge part of the game. This is just one small part to it, this card laying aspect, that if you're getting this game hoping that it'll draw the trick-taking fanatics out of your life into the 4X genre, I am sorry to report that likely that's not going to happen. I don't necessarily think it's misleading, but I think it's a little too far removed from what standard trick-taking games do, not that that's necessarily a bad thing, to warrant putting the trick-taking mechanic front and center. As an action mechanic, I think it sounds very exciting, and it does remind me of Puerto Rico or Rising Sun or anything where you get to play an action and everybody gets to sort of take that action if they want. But you, having played the action, get a little better version of that action. And it's giving people the opportunity to also get that better version if they happen to have the right cards in their hand. But I just think it is a small enough aspect of the game and not a complete connection with other trick-taking games that you're not necessarily going to get your parents who only play the crew, whoever's parents those might be, into this game, which has a much heavier sort of war and battle focus and area control focus as well. So it won't override the other aspects of the game that are going on. Now, reason number 2, you shouldn't get arcs, and this is the big one. This might even be bigger than number 1, but I'm putting it here. It's that there will be a retail release and it will be cheaper to get to your door. Now, this is what I was mentioning at the beginning of the video in terms of depending on your location. But for me in Canada, to get the base copy of ARCS, it's going to cost me $60 US and then $32 US in shipping. So that puts it at $92 US or around $114 Canadian. That's a lot of money. Even if you go in on a group buy, which if you're in Toronto, like I am, is a possible thing. You can get up to 5 copies in a group. It would reduce the shipping to around $14 each, making the price point $74 US or around $92 Canadian for the base pledge. This feels like an episode of Crowdfunding Countdown, this show that I do every Monday, where I often break down games based around their cost analysis, also focusing on shipping, because I think it is very important to recognize that the price tag you are paying is never the price tag that it's going to cost to get to your door. You always have to factor in the shipping cost and the base game cost as your total cost and see if that cost is still something you will be satisfied with. And this is also a specific consideration with leader games because they never have Kickstarter exclusives, so you never have to worry about the FOMO. And while I really respect that about their mentality, that also makes it easier to calculate this sort of cost analysis. Because what you're getting extra, they're throwing in a little mini expansion, whatever it's called, Arcs, Too Many Cooks, which adds in a bunch more cards. Arcs, More to Explore, that was it. That little mini expansion is getting thrown in for free. But when I look it up in my local store, 401 Games here in Toronto, they have that mini expansion listed as $15 Canadian, which is easier to make that evaluation. And they also have a bundle pre-order listed where you get the More to Explore and the base game for $76 Canadian. Because they're basically taking care of the shipping for you. So even in your group pledge to Toronto, you could pay $92 Canadian, or you could pay $76 Canadian. Or if you're doing it by yourself, you could pay $114 Canadian, or you could pay $76 Canadian. You could save yourself that money. You could add on an extra game. This is the easiest game to say no to and to not back if you are looking for the cheapest cost, if your budget is tight, because you can get them for cheaper at retail. They also have the campaign expansion for $50 Canadian. They also have the minis expansion for around $70 Canadian, which would make your total around 190 Canadian, which is what is projected 190 Canadian, $150 US for that highest tier. So relatively the same as you get further up, but then again, you still have to factor in that shipping. And this does feel slightly different from their previous games. Root Marauders, for example, was going for around 50 US, and you got a Hirelings pack, and you got a Landmark pack. That was their base pledge. And so you'd have to purchase all of those things individually if you got it at retail. And so getting it during the Kickstarter actually ended up being a $3 to $4 discount after you paid the shipping. I'm just guessing on what the shipping would be, but I assumed it was a little lower than it currently is because that was before the shipping crisis blew up in all of our faces. But for this one, if you live in a big city, if you live in proximity to free shipping from a retail store or a big retail store, check out their prices. Go and see if it is a better deal and factor in the shipping, because retail stores will absorb all the shipping cost for you. You can get it cheaper and you're still supporting the publisher. Now, if you want to support the publisher the most and you're truly passionate about leader games, and honestly, I think there are probably many of you out there who are, because they have produced great stuff, and that's fantastic, then support at the Kickstarter. They will get more funds than if you did it at retail because you cut out the middleman, you order directly from them. And if that cost differential is negligible or close to negligible, that's also what I would suggest. Because why not support the publisher more? I mean, I like supporting my local game store, but I also like supporting the people who are creating the things that I like. And if it's about the same price, then I'll tend to support the publisher more. Or if you feel you really need to get that copy before anyone else does, because Kickstarters usually fulfill a little bit sooner than retail stores do, well then, hey, yeah, keep supporting it at the Kickstarter. But personally, I feel like that is a silly idea because the game will still be good when you get it, regardless of if you get it now or if you get it 2 months from now. It's still gonna be good. And if it isn't good, then it was never good to begin with. And you should thank yourself for being able to realize that and see the shine fade off of it before you get your copy. And then, hey, you can sell your copy and shrink, probably for more money. So that was number 2. Now, on to number 1. The number 1 reason you shouldn't back ARCs is, well, if you can convince a friend to back it instead. I say this half in jest, but half because I actually have something legitimate to talk about. The half in jest part is because I know my friend Matt, who purchased the Root expansion. When I asked him, because he recently got it and recently started playing it, I said, oh, what did you buy for the Root expansion? And how much did you pay for it? And like, what was the cost evaluation? Because I wanted to include that data in point number 2, obviously. And he responded with, I can't remember what I paid for it, but I know it was absolutely worth every penny, and you should come over and play it right now. And so I know if I really wanted to, I could probably push him a little bit in the direction of picking up a copy so that I could try it out on his dime. He might be susceptible to this sort of peer pressure because of all the things that I've talked about in this video. But the main point here that I really think is interesting to consider and worth bringing up, and something I have only recently realized and have actively started culling my collection because of it, is that you don't need 4 copies of the same game at each member of your gaming group's houses. You don't. If one of you has ARCs, or you know a friend who's getting ARCs, or this can apply for any game, really, but we're talking about ARCs here, and, well, I have to make this number 1 good, so let's keep it specific to ARCs. If you have a friend who is purchasing ARCs, and who is dead set on purchasing ARCs, and loves the game, and perhaps loves it more than you, then let them get it. Don't feel like you need to add it to your collection. When I first started seriously getting into the board gaming hobby, I would go over to friends' houses, I would play a game that they had, and I would think, this is amazing, I love this game, and I go out and I find it and I buy a copy. And then I look at it on the shelf, I'm like, oh, I can't wait for this friend to come over so we can play my copy of this game. When in reality, I could say, hey, you're coming over to play games? Great, bring this game that I like. And we would play it. Not only do you save yourself money, but you enable your friend group to diversify and to have a more diverse shelf and selection. We only have, or at least I only have, a limited amount of space. And if that space is filled up with games that my friends also have, it makes no sense. This is one of the reasons why I recently got rid of Small World. Well, because I'm not like the biggest fan of Small World. I think it's a fun game and I'll happily play it, but a group of friends owns Small World, and then the other person who I play it with also owns Small World. So me having a copy of Small World didn't make any sense. And in fact, when we did a big sort of neighborhood meetup and everybody brought games to trade away, 2 of us brought copies of Small World because we both came to the same realization. And so they took my copy because mine had better storage, little storage containers that I had put in, and I thought I was going to be left with their copy because they got drawn first to go pick a game, but then somebody else eventually took their Small World, and then I was able to not be stuck with it. But I'm really leaning into this sort of mentality of sharing collections and sharing the load and thinking about who I play games with most frequently, because yeah, you're going to play games with multiple people, but you are also going to have your standard gaming groups. And so I'm focused on those people who I know I can borrow games from, who I lend games to all the time now, just to free up space on the shelf as things keep on coming in. And I've kind of detached myself a bit from that need of ownership. And that has been really freeing in a way. And I'll still pick up games that I think are really interesting and I want to play, but detaching yourself from that ownership need, I think is important. And so if you know a group that is likely to enjoy it more than you, or a person who's likely to enjoy it more than you, whose house it should reside in, then yeah, push them into it. Say, you should get this one, I'll get the next one, make it a back and forth, start that conversation, and I think both of your collections will be better for it. So that's all I've got for this video. Those are my 5 reasons you shouldn't back ARCs. I don't necessarily know how convincing I was, because I think mechanically this game looks cool, but I think my reason number 2 should really apply to everyone, and that is my own reason why I am not interested in backing at this Kickstarter level. Because there's literally 0 reason for me to do so other than just spending $16 extra or $40 extra if I'm unable to get in on a group pledge, if they fill up before I decide. And I love seeing that this campaign has done so well, especially because they have taken that mentality and stance. They're not trying to promote this fear of missing out. They're not in the business of marketing exclusives that don't mean anything. They're in the business of making a cool game, and I really like that. And also that means that I can get it later. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I am willing to be convinced one way or the other. Make sure to drop your comments in the comment section below. And not just for me, people might be coming to this video debating whether or not they should get it, and seeing people's enthusiasm or people's reasoning not to, I think is always helpful. It's much more helpful to have multiple opinions below this video rather than just me angrily screaming and losing my Canadian citizenship at the camera. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. If you're still here, well, you must not hate my guts that much, so just hit the subscribe button. Just do it. You won't even notice it. Hit the like button too while you're at it. Oh, hit the dislike button now. Okay, now hit the like one. Now hit the dislike. Now hit the like. Yeah, we'll finish. We'll finish on the like. Finish on the like. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. My name's Chris George, and oh no, I don't have a catchphrase. I thought I would come up with one by now. No, you know what? I do have a catchphrase. And I'm just not telling. Maybe next time. See ya.